Welcome back. Joining us now is Dave Bond, the CEO of OCPA Impact, a 501c4 nonprofit organization working in Oklahoma to remove our state's remaining barriers to job growth, business growth, and individual opportunity. Dave, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Mike.
Let's start off with just some general thoughts that you might have on what happened Tuesday.
Well, I think it's interesting. This is kind of the third Republican electoral wave that Oklahoma has experienced. The first was in '94, 2 years after Bill Clinton first got elected. Second was 2010, 2 years after Barack Obama got elected. And the Obama administration has given Oklahoma Republicans yet another wave. And it's interesting, Mary Fallin has been a key part of all three of those. In '94, she was elected first female and Republican lieutenant governor. A few years after that, helped get right to work across the finish line, a game changer for Oklahoma's economic climate. In 2010, she was elected first female governor of the state, and in that capacity got another significant economic achievement across the finish line with workers' comp and tort reform. And so now, after this latest wave in which she has the biggest legislative Republican majority in the state's history, maybe a unique opportunity to get that last elusive economic development piece locked into place, a phase out of the personal income tax.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, what does this mean moving forward? And you went to the personal income tax. Why is that? Why do you think that that's an opportunity this year?
Well, a couple different reasons. One, it's kind of the last remaining big ticket game changer for Oklahoma's economic climate. Also, it was interesting in her campaign, apart from those issues of pushing back against federal overreach in Oklahoma, Obamacare and themes of that nature, the state level policy issue her campaign kept coming back to in the debate with Joe Dorman and a lot of her advertising was the income tax issue. It's probably no coincidence that the biggest, boldest proposal from her office during her first term, in most folks' estimation, was her proposal in 2012 to phase out the personal income tax.
So I want to ask you, your organization works all over the state, and so there's always this question our viewers are probably thinking at home, okay, what came out of the campaign for Tuesday that then is going to lead into next session? So what were you hearing and what did you see from voters across the state that you think is going to translate into the top topics at the state capitol next year?
Honestly, when it comes to conversations about education spending and tax cuts, a lot of folks have been looking actually to a race outside the state. Kansas, Governor Sam Brownback was up for re-election. Both liberal and conservative media considered him finished, even the morning of the election day. And yet he pulled out a victory, of course, riding the Republican wave that we saw all across the country. But also, a lot of folks expected Kansas voters to repudiate what he'd done on the tax issue there, where he'd eliminated the income tax on small business profits. He'd lowered the income tax rate in Kansas significantly below Oklahoma's even, and had locked in a plan to get rid of the tax over time, putting us in what Governor Fallin herself has called an income tax sandwich.
You mentioned education as well, so that's a big topic every year. What does Hoffmeister's win, and you heard Trevor Worthen, I mean, it was a convincing win, not too many votes off of what the governor achieved. What does that tell us about the education conversation next year at the Capitol?
You're going to have probably two different dynamics that we've seen over the past few years probably come to a head in some respects. At least that's a possibility. On one side, you've got the education establishment, whether that's the teachers lobby, whether that's the superintendents association or the school boards association, pushing for growth in state government funding for education, even though it takes up about half the budget currently. But at the same time, you've also got, what does the Oklahoma electorate how have they voiced their opinion the last few years? You had State Question 744 a few years ago, which would have ballooned the education budget, and voters turned that down. You had the vote 2 years later on the state ballot to start taxing intangible property with the money supposedly going to education. Voters approved that to prevent that tax increase. So there's kind of an impasse here between what the education community is screaming for and what the voting electorate here in Oklahoma has said how they view the subject.
Okay, so let me ask you then, why is it that every year during session it seems like the education lobby has such a strong influence, even with a Republican-dominated legislature, yet during the election cycle that lobby works against Republicans and has never succeeded? The Republicans continue to be reelected and do well even in facing that opposition. Why do they still have such a strong voice during session?
Part of it is that it's not their first rodeo. The education community has a lot of practice in amplifying their voice during the legislative session. They're pros. They know how to do that. You also have the factor that's a very real dynamic where you've got I'd say a majority of the membership of the Republican caucuses of both the state House and the state Senate have direct, immediate family ties to public education. And for many of them, particularly those outside the Oklahoma City and Tulsa metro areas, public education is the largest employer in their district. So those are real dynamics that they have to go home to at the end of every week.
And let me ask you about the governor and the legislature and how they'll work together on policy next year. The governor did not have as strong as a finish as many of the statewide office holders had, but as Trevor pointed out, it was still, for a re-elect, it was a pretty good showing. So what do you expect in terms of the governor's influence and involvement with the legislature? Did this race change that, improve, hurt, anything going next year?
You saw just about every governor across the country who pushed a bold vision for their respective states get reelected yesterday, or earlier this week. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Rick Snyder in Michigan, and others. And so voters, particularly with what's going on in Washington right now, voters across the country seem to be very interested in strong executive leadership. It will be interesting to see how that translates into the upcoming 2015 session here this coming spring.
With some new leadership and even growing seats in the Senate and a fresh start for the governor and into her 4 years, what do you expect to be top issues or some things? What should our viewers be watching for as issues next session?
I think big issues of economic growth have the potential to be a major theme of the coming session, especially you still have a significantly large Republican House majority and a much even larger, historically large Senate Republican majority. Education, there will be some conversations about that too, and just that dynamic of what's supposed to grow faster, state government or the private sector. I mean, that's a conversation that's going on in a lot of states around the country, and I don't think Oklahoma will be too different.
Dave, for folks at home that might want to learn more about your organization or get some information from you, follow along, what's your website? Where can they find about
I appreciate that shameless plug. Thank you. OCPAimpact.com. Folks can sign up to get alerts during session as key votes of private sector economic growth in Oklahoma are coming up during the session. Thanks.
Any final thoughts on coming out of this election cycle before the end of the year?
It'd be interesting to see, there's going to be a conversation nationally of which certain Oklahomans may factor into that. And also looking down the road to 2018, the Steve Largent experience in 2002, where you were supposed to have a Republican governor pass over to another one, didn't happen. What will happen the next 4 years that may impact that going forward here?
Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And folks, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.